Good evening. Hi, I'm Jackie Caruso, Devinwood Collies, and I'm here tonight to talk to you about influences. That's the bedtime story tonight. It's about the people and the things that have influenced me in my journey in dogs, and hopefully it will make you reflect on who and what has influenced you and how you want to be remembered as someone who influences others. Influence is all around us, both good and bad. You have to be open to the good influence. There are people and educational opportunities in our breed and in the dog world itself. There are also many negative influences right now that I believe are affecting our breed and dog showing in general. A couple of weeks ago, Little Richard passed away. Little Richard was a pioneer of rock and roll. Without Little Richard, there would be no Paul McCartney, no Elton John, Mick Jagger, or Prince. Each of these very talented men were influenced by Little Richard, and that influence helped them develop their style. They have all publicly acknowledged that they would not have ever achieved what they achieved without Little Richard. So that is, his style was very different. And it was a sound that no one had ever heard before. And if they had just discarded it as being something too different or too radical, they never would have been open and receptive to letting that influence, that style, that influence affect their style. They were all very, very talented, but the influence of Little Richard refined it. And that's a lesson for all of us in dogs. We need to acknowledge the people who influenced us in our careers. None of us does this by ourselves. We use other people's dogs, we buy other people's dogs, we breed to other people's dogs. Those dogs that were produced by the hard work and the vision and the knowledge of other breeders. There are people who've had to start their careers over and they had to use another breeder's dogs, or there were breeders who co-breed with somebody, but they never give the other breeder the credit. Don't be that person. Loyalty and gratitude are two of the most important things you can bring to this, and it does not diminish you to acknowledge the help and the influence of someone else. It doesn't cost you anything. We're very fortunate that we have many specialty shows. However, we can't live just in a world of specialty shows. We're never going to learn by being provincial. We have to expand our knowledge. We can learn so much from people in other breeds. I know for myself, when I go to an all-breed dog show, I love to watch the terrier group. I don't think you can learn more about type and balance than from the terriers. Years ago, I went to the ASSA National, and aside from the really great mentoring and judging programs they had there were some really beautiful dogs. The one in particular that stood out was the dog that went best of breed. He was 12 years old. That dog had classic virtues that you could translate really to any other breed. Another time, I was at the Bull Terrier National with Pete Dembo, who also breeds bullies. And we were sitting there watching judging. I know absolutely nothing about the breed. But, the good ones were standing out. We were kind of moving along with what the judges were doing. And that leads me to something Tom Cohen said to me many years ago. We were at a dog show, and he remarked about a particular dog that he thought was really beautiful. Well, I don't find that breed particularly visually appealing, and I said that to him. And he said, yeah, but look, he said, the good ones have a light around them. They have an aura. And I thought about that, and he's right. Have you ever seen a dog and it just stands out to you? It has that something. I think that's something that we really need to remember when we're looking at our own dogs. They have that something really special. And that, you don't have to always know all the details. Sometimes that just stands out to you. And another thing that really remains in my mind is we were at the National Dog Show, and we're online for pictures, and the beautiful Skye, the Fox Terrier Skye, was in line ahead of us. And I've always admired the dog, and I said so to the handler. And he did what most handlers will do. He turned the dog to me, he made the dog show. You know, she looked at me, she jumped up on me, and I looked into her face, and she had the most exquisite, intense, burning expression that I've ever seen. If I'd just been there busy looking at my own dog and not paying attention, I never would have had that experience. And to this day, that, you know, I think of her and I remember that expression. You know, we often hear from collie people that only the specialty shows count. I disagree. As someone who bred a dog that was campaigned as a special and went on to be a #1 dog, winning multiple best in shows, but also, you know, big specialty shows, I have to say, and I don't want anybody to get insulted here, but some of the wins under some judges who were highly successful in their own breed were far more meaningful to me than from a judge who had just met the minimum requirements to judge dogs. All wins are not equal. Brings me to another subject, as long as I'm on that tear, our Hawkins system. It's time for the system to be revised. Let's face it, we all know what's going on. We no longer have the depth of quality, even at the specialty shows. It's just not what it used to be. So take a top winning dog who's winning best in shows, an entry of maybe 1,000, defeating dogs of breeds who maybe themselves have 100 best in shows, and they get a measly 10 Hawkins points. You take another special who goes to every little specialty show there is, and maybe that one's the only special there, but that dog gets points for every single dog. It really isn't fair. And, you know, the CC of A, I feel, really differentiates between the two. And, you know, not all dogs who are campaigned at all breed shows are necessarily the lesser dogs. I'm not talking about the summer shows with 3 dogs out of coat. I'm talking about dogs that are heavily campaigned and, you know, who can also win big specialty shows. They can win our nationals. You know, you see it in other breeds, but, you know, we have this culture within the CC of A where we don't acknowledge that. My own handler, who has campaigned 2 top winning dogs, will not participate in the top 10 for that very reason, for the lack of respect for the achievements of those animals. When we were campaigning our dog, Roz Durham, who I had never met, wrote us a lovely letter. And in her letter, she said that as a former handler, she fully understood the time, the effort, the dedication, and the financial commitment it took to keep a dog out there at that level. And that she personally was very proud that that dog represented her breed. Something like that stays with you forever. It is way more meaningful than just a ribbon. So on to more influences. One of my earliest influences was when I joined the Collie Club of Northern New Jersey. There I met 2 people that I'm friends with today, Nancy Salvatore and Kathy Banks. We had some hilarious and wonderful adventures together. At that time, the Collie Club in Northern New Jersey had members that, you know, we had read about in the history books. John Giuliano being one of them. John Giuliano was a lovely man, and he was so willing to give of his time and his advice and, you know, really teach you about collies. And so one of my earliest recollections is what he said to me about, you know, getting into all this. Read the standard. That's the first thing you have to do. Before you go buying a dog or you do anything else or think you want to breed a dog, learn your standard. Read it. If you don't understand it, come and ask somebody who can explain something to you. Then what you want to do is you want to go to the national. You want to go to the national and you want to take your standard with you, go to the national and start looking at dogs to see if you like some that, you know, appear to fit the standard as best you understand it. Develop your eye. If you like a dog and you see a dog that appeals to you, go see if the mother or father are there. Go see if the offspring are there. Read the standard. Always go back to your standard and try to develop your eye. And most importantly, listen and don't talk. That's not really easy for me because I started talking really young and I haven't stopped since. But I did listen. And we went to the Centennial in Chicago, and there I started to see dogs that, appeal to me. And, I'd go back and I'd look at the standard, I'd see some offspring, and, those were mostly from the Twin Creeks line. We actually purchased and exhibited dogs for 8 years before we even attempted to breed our first litter. It was only after we did all the research, all the studying of the standard, going to the dog shows, developing our eye for the dog, that we even attempted it. Because then we kind of knew the direction we wanted to go in. The other influence I had from the Collie Club of Northern New Jersey was Joe Kohler. Joe Kohler was my mentor, really, in all the ways of showing dogs. And he gave me 3 pieces of advice that I try to follow to this day. Never be the one to break the major. Always congratulate the winner. You can kick, scream, and curse when you get in that car, but you know what? Congratulate the winner with a smile on your face. And never, ever talk about anybody or their dog ringside, because you never know who's standing behind you. My voice carries, so to this day, when I go to a dog show, I turn around to see if anybody's standing behind me, because you never know who's connected to who, and we're all opinionated, so one never knows. And I hope that, if I say something I shouldn't, maybe somebody will shush me. Perception. I remember the day that my friend Nancy Salvatore from Northern New Jersey called me up and said, "Jack, this is so exciting. They've asked us to be trophy chairs." And I said, "Okay." She said, "This is going to help our dogs." And I thought, well, I'm not really sure how that's going to happen, but I'll give it a shot. So for 2 or 3 years, we bought the trophies, we begged people for money, we dragged those trophies to the specialty shows. We were good little soldiers. And so after some time went by, I said, "Nancy, how did this help our dogs exactly?" Well, it certainly didn't help our dogs win, which is what I think she thought was going to happen. But what it did do is we met people. We, learned how dog shows work. And we learned that really to get, you really have to give. Dog people are really funny. They watch. You don't know that they're watching, and you think as a newcomer that nobody's watching you. And I think that we tend to, just sort of new people kind of stay in the background a little bit. But you'd be surprised, people are watching you. And nobody's really going to give you their advice and their time and all their effort if, you come on the scene, 3 days later you think you know everything and, whatever. That's not going to happen. They watch and they wait and they see, is this person really serious? Are they learning? Are they trying to, do whatever they can with the dog that they have? They watch. And it's true, because when Champion Twin Oaks High Plains Drifter won the stud dog class at the National in Ohio, and it was one of the largest stud dog classes ever. There were 21 stud dogs in their get. When he won that class, I remember one person, pretty famous collie person, jumping over a row of crates to congratulate us. And John Honig, and that name carried a lot of weight in those days, came up to us, John and Evelyn Honig, and he said, "We've been watching this dog. We've been watching you to see what you would do with this dog." And, you kind of come into the fold when people start to believe you're serious. So don't ever think that nobody's watching, because they are. And it's all about perception. And as a man that I worked for many years used to say to me, "Jack, perception is everything." So influence is all around you. No one is going to give you a written set of instructions on how to breed a great dog. This isn't a paint by the numbers deal. I've gone to many seminars, and this is a big thing with me because for my work, I attend a lot of seminars and training classes. And I go to these seminars and I see people scribbling down notes. They're not listening to a word that's being said. They're so busy scribbling down those notes that they don't absorb anything. So what happens is, because it's happened to me, is if you're so busy scribbling down notes, usually by the time I get home, I have a book full of notes that I can't even read. You have to stop and think. You have to listen and you have to absorb. The knowledge is out there, but you have to absorb it. Another real influence, which is more relevant now today than I think ever before, was the article written by Barbara Schwartz called Consider the Source. In this day of social media, can we really distinguish between someone who really knows what they're talking about or fake news? When somebody puts up a picture of a dog and they tell you how wonderful it is and how much, it's just wonderful and how much they love it, and the dog may or may not be correct, it may have a glaring fault, and 22 other people jump up and down and say, oh my God, this is wonderful, this is wonderful. It's a herd mentality, and what's happening is they are feeding off false information because they're not thinking about, okay, we have a standard, does this dog look as if it fits the standard? Nothing like that. They're just kind of going along with the crowd, and it's false information. It is not beneficial to the learning process. So on the subject of the standard, I'm only going to say one thing, and I believe very, very strongly about this. We have a standard. We do not change our standard to win ribbons, or to tailor it to suit our breeding program or our personal agendas. The standard rules. From the days of CC of N&J, I decided to purchase a dog from Twin Creeks, and the story of that trip with Nancy Salvatore and Marjorie Tuff is legend. Details will not be shared here. Ben and Joyce Hauser created a family of collies, and to listen to them talk about their breeding theories, and to hear Ben Hauser go out into that kennel where there were many dogs, and he knew every single dog there. He knew the sires, he knew the dams, he knew the offspring, he knew where they won, what they did. It was really, really fascinating. After that, we took a trip to the National in Atlanta, and there I saw a bitch that went reserve winner's bitch under Marcia Keller, bred by Mary Benjamin. And now all the dogs that I saw at that show, I followed John Giuliano's advice. I looked to see who the sire was and the dam was and the offspring, and most of them that I really liked had been sired by champion Twin Oaks Joker's Wild. So I set about to purchase a puppy from Mary Benjamin. But I made many trips out to Michigan. Mary and I became great friends, and I purchased my foundation bitch from her, Madeline, Twin Oaks Matter of Trust, who was more from the Twin Oaks, Omega, Executive, Mariah side of the pedigree. And a couple of years later, I purchased another bitch. These two bitches became my foundation bitches. And that one, Twin Oaks Dance With Me, was more from the Venice side. Mary had done some breedings to the Venice dogs, and she greatly admired the Venice dogs. These two bitches became the foundation for all the dogs I have here. Twin Oaks Dance With Me, Grand Champion Devinwood A Perfect Stranger goes all the way back to Twin Oaks Dance With Me on his mother's side. So Mary was a great influence, but she didn't take my hand, and give me a lesson. I just listened and I observed. On any given day when you would go there, there would be the most, all the really important people in collies. And just listening to the conversation is how you learned. When Mary would have a litter of puppies, she would put them in an exercise pen and she would just sit there and watch them. She wouldn't say anything. She would just sit there and watch them. And her late husband, Clark, who was a man of few words, but had a great eye for a dog, he would just sit and look at those puppies, and then, suddenly he'd say, that's a good one. And I'd run over to see what the good one looked like, or what it was, try to figure out what it was about the one that, after all that time, he said it was the good one, as it was related to the other puppies. The great thing about working with someone who breeds a family of dogs like that is whenever I had puppies and I had a question about growth and development, I would ask Mary, and Mary would give me the answer. She knew. I mean, she came from, philosophy of line breeding. And in those days, in the Midwest, the Midwestern breeders, there was a group of them. You had Joyce Hauser and Joyce Weineman, you had Rita Stanzik, you had Carol and Sue Fabeck. They all their dogs basically, they were working with basically the same dogs, but a little different. So Mary would breed to something of Joyce's, Joyce would breed to something of Rita's. So they had a larger pool of resources, to call upon, because they were line breeding with just a little touch of something different. When I started breeding, that family of dogs and came here to the Northeast, hardly anybody had, almost nobody had, those families of dogs, where you could go to work with. Several years after I acquired those bitches, I had the great fortune to acquire a champion Twin Oaks High Plains Drifter ROM. I got him when he was a young dog, about 2 years old. He already had 6 points in a major. He is behind almost every single dog I have here, and his influence lives on in my dogs today. So like the musicians who acknowledged the influence of Little Richard, I have to acknowledge the influence that I would never have achieved what I have without the cornerstone dogs that I obtained from Mary Benjamin of Twin Oaks Collies. I would go to the Nationals with Mary, and there would always be an entourage of people. Mary was at the height of her success. Everybody wanted to be in that circle. So every year I would go with her, and, I would make a new friend every year, through her. And so, you'd have people like Sue Fabeck, Ed and Fran McNamee, Carol Fabeck, Rita Stanzik, Shirley and Len Perry, Sherilyn Wishlak, Sue Abraham, Joan Kirkland, among others. I mean, it was just really great. And some of those people I'm friends with till today. Greatness is what we should strive for. Breeding is a creative effort. It is not a team sport. We're so obsessed these days with winning and finishing dogs really fast that there have been sites that have sprung up on the internet, such as Let's Make a Major. Now, I've had a lot of arguments with people about this. Not everybody feels the same way that I do. They feel that, hey, it's great, I've got something that needs a major to finish, you have something that needs a major to finish, so let's all get together. Well, that's okay if that's the objective. But what happens is you see now that you have people, where they just, they're just dragging anything into the ring to make the major. And that's an insult to the judge. It's an insult to the dogs, and it's an insult to the breed. Don't people think that the judges are smart enough to figure out that when you have 5 dogs, 4 of whom probably shouldn't be there, and one person stays on the better one, and then they're getting people who don't even know how to show dogs to bring the other into the ring. Don't you think they figure out what's going on? I think that we all, everybody has different goals. I mean, maybe some people just want to run around the ring on a Sunday afternoon. But, for me, and the question I would ask is, don't you want to breed the brilliant dog? The one that contributes to the breed by what he produces or how he represents the breed? Do you want the dog that people remember as an ideal, or do you just want a bunch of champions? To each his own. It's far too easy to finish a champion these days. When I started out, you needed 23 males for a 3-point major. Now we need 7. When the magazine started making the lists for this top list and that top list, I think that the focus shifted from quality to quantity. It shouldn't be about how many. It should be about how good. Collie Club of America Breeder of the Year Award is another issue. It's a numbers game. And even though the committee that has, they worked very hard to add some things to it, some parameters to it, to maybe make it not so much of a numbers game, no matter how you look at it, it's still a numbers game. And I don't know how you can have an award of excellence without some component of excellence or contribution. When even when I started, even the biggest kennels would only bring out like one dog a season, even the biggest ones, maybe two, never the same sex, never at the same show. So every time you'd go to one of the specialty shows, and oh, by the way, they didn't pick and choose either. If they were there for the weekend, they were there for the weekend. And so you'd look around the ring, and people that you'd read about in the books and the magazines are all standing there with the best of what they had to offer for the season. It made you strive to be better. You had to be better, or you would never survive that competition. We're missing that today. When people bring 6 and 7 dogs of their own, and then they encourage, and they sell the 4th and 5th pick to people, and then they encourage them to show those dogs. I'm sorry, I just really feel that we're doing nothing but encouraging mediocrity. It's probably not a real popular opinion, but what can I say? And I have never, in all my years of breeding, looked at a litter and thought that every single puppy in that litter was the best. That would actually be impossible by the very nature of the word. You can't have, there's a best, and then there's a second best and a third best. They're not all the best. So why would anyone want to spend their time and their effort and their money on, campaigning third pick just to make a champion? It doesn't make sense to me, but, I'm not, everybody has their own agenda. Let me be clear about this, though. I am not talking about handlers. I have tremendous respect for handlers. They don't win, as some people think, because of who they are, necessarily. They win because they have talent. They win because they understand the standard. They know the faults and the virtues of the client's dog, and they present them to the best of their ability. I'm talking about people who flood an entry with the idea that something has to win, and they'll get points. When Tom Cohen was handling dogs, prior to the first specialty show in the Northeast, which was the Connecticut Specialties, you couldn't just call him up and say, "Oh, would you handle my dog?" No, you had to drive to his house. No matter where you came from, you had to drive to his house, and in effect, he had to interview the dog. And if he didn't think that dog was ready, if he didn't think the dog could win under those judges, if it was too fat or too skinny or needed more coat, he sent you home. And he made you do your homework. He made you be better because you had to evaluate your dog, because nobody wanted to take that ride up there to get sent home. I mean, that was not the objective. He never went to a show and just, ran into the ring with a dog. He and Naomi never went to a show with more dogs than they could possibly handle, and they just start breeding grabbing anybody ringside to bring a dog into the ring. The influence there was show your best at its best. Janine Walker Keith, who was a great competitor in her day, told me the same thing. She said, you get one dog, you train it to perfection, you condition it to perfection, you show it to perfection. That's what you do. And then, you concentrate all your efforts on that dog. And both Tom and Janine said to me that when you're campaigning a dog, as a special, but when you're, really anytime, you get one great picture of the dog, a picture that, exemplifies the virtues of the dog. You never ever show a picture of a dog where the dog doesn't look good, no matter what it won. It could win the national, but if it does not look good in that picture, do not publish that picture. So I followed their advice, and the picture of Drifter that has been used many, many times was taken by Jan Hatterley. And we all know the picture of Finn taken by Nancy Anstruther. Those pictures are classics, and they captured Both of them. Both those photographers captured the essence of those dogs. And I thank both of them for their very, very talented work. And I would hope that when those dogs are mentioned, that's the image that you see in your head of those dogs, because that's how I would like them remembered. Since I can't show dogs myself, I set out to find a handler, and it has always been my philosophy that when you're looking to do something, you go to the top, not the bottom. And I do it in work. I have no problem if I have a question or I need to know something of calling the president of a company to find out. I don't call, a clerk in the office. I go straight to the top. And that's what I felt I did when I hired Tom and Naoma. They handled dogs for me for many years, and life in their setup was an invaluable learning experience. Not only was I exposed to other families of dogs and to another breed of dog, the Shetland Sheepdog, and I've owned several over the years, but, just staying in the setup and listening to the conversation as they would get a dog prepared to be shown, because, they have to know the faults and the virtues to present these animals, it was just a phenomenal learning experience. It was really priceless. Pete Denbo was Tom's assistant at several nationals. When we took Drifter out to the national in Reno, Nevada, Pete was in charge of Drifter. He was the first one there in the morning. He was the last one to leave at night. And he had a phenomenal work ethic, and it was really, really impressive. And I said to him, when Tommy retires, if Tommy retires, because he'd been threatening for years, I'll hire you. I'm going to hire you as a handler. And I did. And it has been the most successful association. In those years, clubs were more active. There were more programs. Clubs put on seminars. And you learned not only at the seminar, but at the get-togethers after. Sadly, that no longer exists. The clubs are small. New people coming into the breed don't want to join the clubs. So we're left to what is put out on social media. Much of what is on social media is self-promotion and Photoshop pictures and information, but we don't know the source of that information. We don't know how credible that information is. When we brought our first foundation bitch, Madeline, Twin Oaks Matter of Trust, we brought her up to the Collie Club of Maine. She threw up all the way from Connecticut to Maine. She looked like a drowned rat when we got there. And I thought, oh my God, this is going to be a disaster. But we got her cleaned up, and they got her groomed up, and, she looked okay. She was just not finished looking to me. And, I was cringing when I'm standing there watching her in the ring and, against all these, finished puppies that look like little adults. And I just wanted to crawl into a hole in the ground. And that day, she went best in sweeps under Shelley Roos and reserve winner's bitch for a major under Marcia Keller, two very respected judges. And I was standing next to Carol Phelps. I hope we all remember her. She was a great breeder, and a very, very talented artist. And she started pointing out the positives about my puppy. And she said, those who know can see the potential. And John Buddy came up to me, and he said, that puppy's not going to win today. She has no puppy bloom. He said, she's just not ready. He said, however, she has virtue and type. And that's a puppy that Steve Field would come up to you and say, bring her back to me when she's ready. Those words have stayed with me for 25 years because it was so much more meaningful than the ribbon to have somebody say that to you. And then he told me, he said, this bitch is going to produce for you. Madeline is behind just about every dog I have here today through her sons and her grandsons, dogs who have produced national specialty winners, a number one dog, a best in show winner. Her influence lives today. A turning point came when John Buddy had this idea. And the idea was that he wanted to create a film of breeders talking about the people who influenced them before the memories faded, before the people were gone. So he asked my husband Ron if he would, help him film it. He had a panel of speakers. It was Tom Cohen, Bob and Sally Futh, Les Canavan, Verna, and Janet Leake and Judy Evans. Joanne Nielsen, who was a member of Tri-County, owned a fabulous horse farm in Bedford, New York, that she allowed us to use every year for the Tri-County Specialty Show. She loaned us the house on the farm for the filming that day. A DVD was produced that is now, and that Ron and John donated to the Collie Club of America, and it is in the CCFA library. I believe you can either rent or buy it. It's called The Breeders' Retrospect. The filming took all day, and the stories were mesmerizing. When you heard the Fuths talk about their friend Ed Pickart and his breeding theories, and you heard them talk about how, they had different theories, if you bred a low ear to a high ear, what would you get? And, they would like bet on it and say, well, we'll see who's right on this. When you heard Sally talk about when she came home from college one day and her mother brought her down to the barn where the dogs were, and there were all the great Chocallan dogs sitting there because Mrs. Browning had called her mother and had asked her to take the dogs because she had become ill. Les Canavan, speaking of Mrs. Long, tells the story that when she called Mrs. Long up to tell her that her dog had won a Best in Show, Mrs. Long said, "But did he deserve it?" Janet Leake and Judy Evans spoke of Edith Levine, Tom Cohn of Brian Carabine of Erin's Own Collies. The one thing that was very, very apparent in all of that is that these people that they were talking about purposefully bred dogs. They had a vision in their head, and they knew what they needed to do, or at least they tried, to breed dogs that would produce the vision. It was so apparent about how these people on the panel were influenced by those people. John had in his personal library, films of many of the people and dogs they were talking about. And when I saw the film of Champion Chocallan Golden Ruler, I thought, I came from a philosophy of pretty strict line breeding. I had my ideas about things, but, I really didn't venture out too far. But I had a bitch, Champion Devinwood Ramblin' Rosie, who was, bred, she's the product of selective breeding over the years for head detail and eye. What she needed was more body style, and she needed more coat. She needed to finish the picture. I really didn't know where to go. I mean, there wasn't, like a family of dogs that I was comfortable with that I really felt had all those qualities. And then this dog came on the scene that people were talking about. I had seen his offspring. They were very impressive. And he was a dog, Champion Windhaven, Stranger in Paradise, that was brought to this country. He's Brazilian bred, brought to the country by Marcos Vinagre as a gift to Lynn Hyman, Lynn Butler of Milos Collies. Now, Alexander de Carvalho is behind that breeding. There are Lakefield dogs behind that breeding, although he did not actually breed the litter that produced Macho. It was Antonio del Biagio. And so I wrote to Alex because, again, I'm not shy. I'll seek it out. And so I wrote to him and I explained the bitch I had. Now, in Brazil and Argentina, many dogs came from this country to go over there. Lynn Butler's Milos dogs, some of her bitches went there. Twin Creeks dogs, Westwind dogs. They were all brought to Brazil. So some of those dogs are way back in that pedigree. Anyway, he was very gracious. He was willing to share information with me, and he sent me pictures of some of the dogs in the pedigree. I could tell from Macho's pedigree that he was very tightly line bred, only I didn't know who the dogs were because they were all Brazilian bred. And so anyway, he sent pictures, and there was one dog in particular, Champion Lakefield Leader, who, looked as if he had a beautiful headpiece, a Pareto type headpiece, but he had a Tocalan type body. So I did it, I saw that film, and when I saw how Tocalan Golden Ruler looked and sort of the same elements were going on there, I thought, well, okay, what's the worst that could happen? It'll either be a great success or a disaster. Well, it wasn't a disaster. Not only did I finish 3 champions from that litter, and I rarely keep multiple dogs from a litter, but he went on to produce Grand Champion Devinwood, a perfect stranger, who, went on to win, all breed best in shows, specialty shows. He was a #1 dog. And, he's a dog who left his mark because people still ask about him as he's not being shown now. And, they remember him, which is really maybe the goal, to breed the great one. And none of that would have happened, though, without the influences from all the things that I've mentioned before. All of those influences converged when I looked at that film and I remembered what people had to say. And, also, it wouldn't have happened without Pete Dembo, because Pete was as committed as I was to the dog, and he really helped that dog reach his full potential. It's an inspiring film, and I urge everybody, rent it, buy it. It is really good. The Breeder's Retrospect, created and produced by John Buddy and Ron Caruso. John Buddy, the eternal seeker of knowledge and a voracious reader, will call from time to time and read an article that he has found that he finds meaningful and he wants to share. It is most often not about collies, nor is it written by anyone in collies, because who do we really have left besides John who writes anymore? The articles by writers such as Andrew Brace, the books Reaching for the Stars by Mary Rosalind Williams, and Understanding Breed Type by Richard Beauchamp have been huge influences and have really helped shape my ideas and visions. I would be remiss if I didn't mention Les Canavan. Les Canavan was an influence on me, but she didn't know it. She was something else. She really, she was a very, very ethical breeder. No nonsense, didn't work out, something was wrong, it was cold. She had strength and energy into her old age, and she was probably the most direct person I've ever met. When I was the district director for the CCV in New York, she called me up one day and wanted to know if I was going to the gathering, which was at Sandy Draper's house. I didn't want to go. I had my reasons for not wanting to go, which was I was not prepared to share with her, but I didn't want to go. So I gave her some excuse about not going. And she said to me, as only she could say, well, it would be in your best interest to go. And I thought, oh boy. Okay, so now I started making up stupid excuses about not being able to drive up there. And she said, no problem. I'll be at your house 9 o'clock tomorrow morning and I will pick you up. And I thought, oh boy, she's going to lecture me all the way up there. She must have something she wants to say to me, and I'm going to be trapped in that car, and it's not going to be pretty. Well, we got into the car, and she started telling me stories of Mrs. Long and the Noranda Collies, of Sandy Tuttle and Hawk, and her days as a handler. I never wanted to get out of that car. I could have driven cross country listening to her talk to me. If I had dug my heels in and didn't go, it would be another wonderful experience that I would have missed. John had another idea. There was a man in upstate New York who had been a protege of Mrs. Browning's of Tocalan, and he actually had the last of the Tocalan dogs. Now, for personal circumstances in his life, he was never able to show those dogs, but he still actively breeds collies and Cocker Spaniels. But John wanted to get his recollections on tape before, again, the memories faded, nobody remembered. He really wanted to do that. And so we set out to go to upstate New York to do the filming. it was by far the most magical day I have ever had in dogs. It was, this sunny, crisp October day. The leaves on the trees were like bright reds and golds. And when we arrived there, Judy Evans joined us for the day. Nick's property was beautiful. He had patterned his kennels after Mrs. Browning's. And, they made us this fabulous lunch, showed us the property. And he had paintings of Mrs. Browning's and her mother's. He had artifacts. He had memorabilia. And, the very sad newspaper stories of her sad ending. But the thing that, you took away from all this, and, he says that he regrets that, he didn't actually continue on with the showing of the dogs, and in a way he feels he failed her. But his love and admiration and respect for this woman was just, it was unbelievable. It just was really great. Another one that John and Ron did was Sue Faybeck. Sue Faybeck was a very successful breeder and exhibitor in her own right. And yet she, would go to the dog shows with Ben and Joyce Hauser, and she told great stories about them, but she would go to the dog shows with them just to be with them. She would help groom dogs, she would help take care of dogs, she would carry the water buckets, but, she viewed it as a learning experience. And again, when you hear her talk of the dogs, you instantly get Sue's vision of a collie. One of the most important things I learned from those tapings and listening to those people was respect. These people talked about people who influenced them, and the respect and the admiration and the acknowledgement were so inspiring. So I have some questions. Do we have that degree of respect today? Who do you respect? Who do you want to respect you? Do we even behave in a manner sometimes to earn respect? Do we want to learn and have thirst for knowledge and breed that great dog, or have we evolved into ribbon chasers? So my next question is, what do you think is a breeder? And how do you want to be remembered? To me, a breeder is someone who commands respect through their actions, who does no harm to the breed, but someone who has developed dogs that when you think of their name, when you mention that person's name, you can see a clear image of those dogs in your head. That's a breeder. They've created something that has endured. Right now we're going through a pandemic. It's terrible. It's horrifying. People are dying. And so many of us feel that, we're being deprived of the things that we love to do and being inconvenienced. I think Mother Nature is giving us a timeout. I think things were, across the globe, veering out of control. Power, greed, you name it, it's happening. So maybe some good things will come of this. Families are spending more time together. I think we're realizing that all of this stuff that we've been acquiring maybe isn't so necessary because we're doing without it, aren't we? We're being limited. We'll come back to normal at some point. But for people and dogs and dog breeders, I think this is a really great opportunity for us to really learn. We have time to read and to study and to really evaluate what we have, and what are our goals? What are our 2-year goals or 5-year goals or 10-year goals? Some years ago, we went to a seminar in California, and there were 2 breeders out there who were talking, and they were talking about how they plan their breedings. And they said, when we plan a breeding, we look back 2 years, 2 generations, to see what was there and what came about. And then we try to project forward 3 generations to see what we need to do to get to that goal that we have in 3 generations from now. Interesting advice and good advice. So I don't know if there's any questions, because I'm reading. Oh, wait, My husband's passing me a note. Hector, of all the breds who you have bred and owned, who do you feel comes closest to the breed ideal and why? Well, that's a tough one. I have some really, really favorite ones. I certainly think Finn comes very, very close to the breed ideal because he had it all. You know, he has the head properties, he has the eye and the expression, he has the body outline, he has the phenomenal temperament. You know, he's the whole picture. I have other dogs, though, that I've bred. Champion Devinwood High Plains Rambler, Champion Devinwood Ramblin' Man, Champion Devinwood Ramblin' Rosie. They're very close to my ideal of the hallmark characteristics of the breed. They're the ones that have the head and the eyes and the expression, you know, but maybe they didn't have the coat or the body style. Finn had it all. You know, but I don't stop there, you know. I mean, he was a great achievement, is a great achievement, but, you know, there's always the next dog. But, you know, for me, the hallmark characteristics are very important. It's just that Finn had all the other components, and it just all came together with him. So, as I said, I can't see any more questions because I'm actually using my iPad as a cheat sheet. But if there are no other questions, I would like to thank the CCFA Outreach Committee for giving me the opportunity to acknowledge those who influenced Devinwood Collies. So I'll say good night now. Bye. Ron? Hello? Okay. Ron? Okay. Ron? Oh, well, are we off? No, not yet. Oh, okay. Oh, wait, we have other questions. This is what working with your husband is like. What?
Hauser breeding theories.
What?
Hauser's breeding theories.
Well, the Hauser's breeding theories are very interesting. Ben Hauser bred cattle, dairy cattle. And one of his theories was that you take, and it's what they did with Champion Twin Creeks True Grit, you take the daughters and you breed them back to the father. That was, you know, he really believed in that and he practiced it a lot. So that was one of his breeding theories. You know, they were looking for certain things and they were able to produce it. I really think that he was truly a brilliant breeder, but his wife, Joyce, really was the silent partner kind of and all that. I mean, she showed the dogs and she was quiet and kind of shy, but I think that Joyce really had great influence in that breeding program.
Talk about your judging career.
My judging career? Okay, well, I've judged about 20 shows now. I've had the great fortune to judge 2 of the Canadian Nationals, and I've seen some really beautiful dogs. I like judging. I think that, you know, I wish that people would look at judging more as a learning experience. Instead of stomping out of the ring because you didn't win, try to understand why. I was at a dog show years ago, and there was a breeder who I think he thought he was going to win. And, you know, he really showcased himself. He was trying to stand under the light and doing this, you know, all this business. He was showcasing and grandstanding, and he didn't win. And when it was over, he came stomping up to the person who won and said, you know, I'd like to see that bitch in the face. And I thought, man, you're a jerk. But then I thought about it, and I thought, well, good for him. You know what? He wanted to see why he didn't win. And I think that if people really watch judges, and if they observe, and they understand the type of dogs a judge has. I mean, you can only judge what you have in the ring before you on the day. I mean, you really can't. You know, what we all want is to see a dog come in the ring out of the corner of your eye and pray to God that that dog is as beautiful when you look it in the face as it is when it's walking into the ring. That isn't always the case. You know, I don't care about a dog's record. None of that comes into play. The dogs have to have the hallmark characteristics of the breed. First, they have to have balance, and then they have to have the head, the eye, and the expression. And they have to look as if they can, do the job they were bred to do. You can't have them scrambling across the ring and think that they're a herding dog. And, you can't have one with big light eyes staring up at you, even though it has a beautiful outline. And you've got 2 minutes to figure all that stuff out in your head. So, I've enjoyed the judging assignments I've had. I really have. And I have to say that at most shows, I have found dogs that I was happy, really happy to be able to reward. The figurine is Finn. A district member of mine, because I'm the Collie Club of America district director in Connecticut, someone I have never met commissioned this for me. I mean, I opened up the box, I couldn't believe it. Apparently her daughter is a sculptress, and she took it from a picture, and she sent that to me as a gift. I mean, these are the things that, the other gift that I really have to mention, because I was so touched by it, is the picture behind me of Champion Devinwood Ramblin' Man. When I judged the Canadian National this last year, they gave that to me as a judge's gift, and it was, my friend said to me, well, how are we going to get that home? What are we going to do with it? And she said, maybe we should ask them to mail it to us. I said, over my dead body, is that going to happen? That thing's coming home with me. I'm carrying it myself. It's not leaving my side. That's it? Okay. So again, I thank the CCFA Outreach Committee for this opportunity for me to acknowledge those who influenced Devinwood Collies. Night.